is I think this is why we see the importance of the body of Christ and the family of faith, not just the natural family, because I think that the church uniquely provides ways for other believers to come alongside families that are not in the ideal situation to offer additional support, guidance, help, whatever, to provide men who can help fill that father figure role, to provide women who can help nurture and care for kids, not because no one else can. There are other people out there that can. I think of coaches as, substitute father figures, right? But the church is uniquely positioned to do that in a special way, but it only happens when there is that mutual accountability and connectedness.
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we take a deeper dive into Sunday's message and explore any questions you might have. I'm your host, AJ Stevens, joined by lead pastor Chip Parker, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime member of the Orchard or a first-time visitor, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spirituality, and daily life, seeking to understand how the wisdom shared on Sundays can be applied to our modern challenges. So grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's dive in together. This is Let's Talk About That, where the conversation about Sunday's message never stops. We're back, and it is the Monday after Father's Day. And Chip, I'm going to ask you, do you feel refreshed, like you were celebrated properly on Father's Day?
I do not feel refreshed, but that is not uncommon for any Monday morning. However, I do feel like I was celebrated properly. Not that my boys had anything to do with it, because I got a 13-year-old and 10-year-old and they're boys, and so they don't really care. But my wife went out of her way, loaded me down with some cool stuff for Father's Day, and is currently working with me to pick out the main part of my Father's Day present, which I'm going to go all in on this one brand of hat that I've been after for a while.
Oh.
If you know me, I'm a cheap guy. I don't like to spend money on things. Matter of fact, the only thing I like to spend money on is my wife, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But I don't like to spend money on anything for myself. And there's these hats that are called Melon hats, Melin. I don't know if you've heard about this yet.
I haven't.
But it's supposedly the perfect hat. No sweat stains.
Oh, I'm immediately in on no sweat stains.
Antimicrobial. It is the perfect golf hat, fishing hat, wear at the beach hat, wear around.
Is it like the it's kind of dry fit-esque?
I think
almost?
so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
But the problem is they're over $50 for a hat. Whew. And never in my life have I done anything remotely close to that. The most expensive hat I ever bought in my life is a fitted Braves hat at the Braves Stadium.
Okay.
That was it, right? And so for Father's Day, she's like, you know what? You're going to get one of those hats. I know you've wanted one for a long time, and you just haven't ever pulled the trigger on it. And so now she's essentially having to walk me through, I don't think I can do this. She's like, no, get a hat. And I'm like,
It's the perfect pickleball hat.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
Is they're the perfect hat. But then I know me. If I get it, if it's expensive, I'll be afraid to wear it. I won't wear it to mess it up. And so
that's fair.
I don't know.
I feel like in my life, this is how it works. I get something nice like that, and I'm like, okay, I got to tiptoe around it and kind of use it subtly. And then there's one moment where you get a scuff on your new shoes, or you get a scuff on your neck. You're like,
bro, you creased them, Jordan.
And you're like, all right, forget it. We're wearing this thing all the time now, brother. It's officially wear friendly.
So the thing is, they have everybody has guarantees and warranties or whatever. Here's their guarantee. Their guarantee is, if this is not your favorite hat you've ever owned, we'll take it back, no questions asked.
Even with the sweat.
How crazy is that? If this is not your favorite hat you've ever owned, we'll take it back.
Melin.
No questions asked.
Melin hats.
So what about you? What about you for Father's Day?
Wait, is that our sponsor from the show? We haven't had a sponsor in a couple
we could be bought for a couple of hats.
Yeah. Man, we didn't really, and I told Katie, I was like, I don't really want to do much, kind of. I just want to hang out and do nothing, really. And that never actually happens in my life, which is fine, because when I say that, I don't actually mean it. In fact, I was talking to a buddy about this the other day. He was like, man, I want to go just kind of float the flats one day in Steinhatchee by myself and just get some R&R. And it was a little Sabbath time. And he's like, yeah, and I was like, see, here's my problem with that. I can't do that. I'm too goal-oriented when I get into something like that. And if I go out there...
And you're too social as well.
Well, I don't mind being by myself. I fished by myself all the time growing up and as a teenager and even sometimes as an adult. But my problem is I find myself not relaxing because I'm trying to accomplish something.
Yeah, I see that in you. Like you're all about the hang, but you have to have the best hang.
Right.
And you're all about the let's go have fun, but you got to have the most fun.
Yes.
And you're all like, whatever you're doing, you have to be like the top at.
Yes. And so if I were to go and just float around the flats, I would find myself, if I didn't have any fish in the box in like the first 30 minutes, I'd be wigging out. I wouldn't be relaxing. I'd be trying to figure out, all right, where do I need to go next? How am I going to make this happen? I got to accomplish this. So
yeah.
Anyway, I'll just say I told Katie I want to just relax. And I also told my buddy, I said, this is why the beach is really good for me. I hate the beach, but I know I need the beach every year. I hate going to the beach. Sand, sun. I'm red-haired. I don't like it. But
AJ doesn't get tan. He gets redder.
Yes, 2 or 3 different shades of red. But when I go there...
You got a nice shade of red going on this morning.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you. Man, I don't know how to respond to that, but I love that. All right, so... But when I go there, I'm forced to just sit there and do nothing. And first day I hate it, and by day 2 or 3, I'm like, I probably really needed this, and it feels relaxing, and it feels good.
Do you nap on the beach?
No, I can't.
I try.
I get too miserably.
I know. I try. But if it's not like 55 degrees, I'm not napping anywhere. No. It's like,
yeah. So. Well, there's two side trails, but yes, we did nothing. Or I said the plan was to do nothing, but then when we got home, we had fish to clean from Saturday. So, me and Dax, man, in true father-son fashion, went out there with Mr. Zach, and we got the box out. And if you have me on Facebook or Instagram, you see my stories. But Dax was a part of the process and threw the fish up on the cleaning table that I think I actually got for, I don't think it was Father's Day, but a birthday. Like a little cleaning table that you prop up and hook your hose into, and boom, you're rocking and rolling with a sink and everything. And yeah, we did that. We hung out for a little bit, and then we went over to some friend's house and had dinner and hamburgers, hung out, let the kids play, and went home. Kids were in bed and just relaxed. It was good.
I like it. That's good. That's good. I like it. Watch any of the College World Series?
I did. I watched that. Man, there's so many hot takes. I have one.
Oh, I know. It's been like that this year.
How the heck did Florida get there? They don't know how they got there, and they're not really sure what to do with themselves. They just keep randomly winning.
So Florida is like that tournament team that you always ran into in tournaments. And if you play baseball, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, they're not really a great team, but they seem to just like get hot at the right time and have just enough to get over it. And then like a week later, you're like, how did that team beat us?
People don't talk about this enough with baseball, I don't think. And maybe it's because you don't really see it or realize it until you get to maybe really good travel ball or college or whatever. But baseball is such a contagious sport, right? And so...
Oh, yeah, no doubt. If you hit, everybody hits.
Well, yeah, you go, I go, is kind of the old phrase there. And same thing with pitching, really. I think it's a confidence thing. And you get a pen that gets hot, and they get hot at the right time. You could have a pen that was abysmal all year long with upper ERAs, and now all of a sudden they're Dyson because they watched their buddy get some confidence. It's
man,
crazy.
And I'm like always on, and we rabbit trail so much, and that's fine. We leave room to rabbit trail the first few minutes of this podcast. But that's what I love about baseball is because baseball is such a game of life, right? Because you've got to learn how to fail. You've got to learn, sometimes you give it your best and it doesn't work out. And is there any sport where the best team doesn't win the championship any more than baseball, right? Because, and to make that, more even, they do series in baseball, but still, like in baseball, any team can beat any team on any given day. And if you get hot at the right time, man, like you can torch the world. And I was kind of hoping that might have been the case with the Gators, that they were like getting hot at the right time, but I don't think
they got a tough draw in the first round. Now, Florida State is a team, when I watch them play, I see a team that like, it's full of guys who, when they get confident, I don't think they think anybody can beat them. And when they get hot, they're going to roll. And
but isn't that college baseball?
Yeah.
That's college baseball.
Bunch of personalities of the dugout, But they're kind of a fun team to watch, a scary team to watch. Their pen is really frustrating as a baseball guy to watch. But I think they're like, that win they got yesterday is going to be...
It's good. It's good for them. So I'm going to say this on record on the podcast. If you know me, I'm a diehard Gator fan. Love my Gators. I have a soft spot for FSU baseball.
Me too.
Because I lived in Perry, grew up there, went to a lot of FSU games, FSU camps, FSU showcases. Mike Martin, not just a great coach, great guy. Love Mike Martin. And so I always have a soft spot for them. And it didn't help that they were playing Tennessee, who I despise.
Oh,
so
gosh, yeah.
Or
I was
it did help.
texting the boys the other day. I was like, when they were playing each other, I was like, this is like watching your cousins kiss. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know who to,
on that move. What's next?
I would tell you my favorite Mike Martin story real quick, since you mentioned Mike Martin. So Mike Martin coached for the Seminole baseball for a really long time, and we had a guy who transferred into Liberty, and he was a fifth-year senior, so grad student, and he played for Boston College, and he was telling us a story, and they had gone on like this massive skid. I think they had lost like 11 or 12 in a row or something, and you know, he's an upperclassman. He's like, we just needed something different, and so we show up to Tallahassee, and we're taking BP, and I mean, he's a pitcher, right? And he caught a little bit. He's kind of a two-way guy, but he's in college is pretty incredible. But he puts his helmet on in the middle of BP and runs out to center field, his helmet, and they're shagging, like, and just takes his helmet, runs straight to center field, and said, I started getting under every single fly ball I could and just seal bouncing it, like putting my arms together and just running up under the fly balls and banging them with my helmet. And he said for them, it was like the morale boost they needed as a team. But he said the coach's response was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He said he went back in the dugout, and both coaches were just standing there talking. Their Boston College coach was talking to Mike Martin, and they're looking out in the outfield, and Mike Martin goes, what the bleep is that guy doing out there right now? I mean, that's the most unbelievable thing the guy had ever that Mike had seen in that moment. But
that's crazy.
Funny Mike Martin story.
Mike Martin was a good dude. So
yeah.
All right, what else we got? Where are we at?
Well, in regard to Father's Day, I want to ask you this: have you heard Luke Combs' attempt to just make every father in America an emotional train wreck with his new album?
What would you assume my answer would be?
I don't know. I don't know what you are, Chip. I tried to do a classic rock game with you one day. You don't listen to classic rock. You've talked country a little bit, and I know Leanne listens to country music, but you're more of a podcast guy, so I'm not really sure what your sweet spot in music is, to be honest.
I know he just came out with an album called Fathers and Sons.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it is, somebody sent me and Katie a song the other day and was like, hey, have you listened to this yet? And I thought it was in a different group chat, and I was like, hey, get out of my face. I don't need this right now. Like, it's not going to take much for me to emotionally unravel with my kid, but, you know, it's just a whole album dedicated to making sure that you appreciate your son, and that sons, you appreciate your fathers, and I love it. So go give it a listen. It's called Fathers and Sons, but
all right,
really good album.
So. Just pulling it up, looking at names of the songs, Front Door Famous, Hunting by Yourself.
Yeah.
The Man He Sees in Me.
The Man He Sees in Me.
My old man was right. I like that.
Yeah. It's a good album. The Man He Sees in Me is one of my favorite ones on the album. I don't want to spoil all the songs too much because I think there's something about just really listening to a song for the first time that gets you. So
I like that. Well, so speaking of My Old Man Was Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking yesterday, what is the most like out of pocket advice or like thing that you ever heard your dad say that you like reflected years later? Yeah, no, we're going to continue that. The most out of pocket thing you ever heard your dad say, and then you just like years later were like, you know what? That was actually pretty wise. That had some wisdom in there. There was a layer there I didn't see.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you finished that because
we're not asking for the most out of pocket thing. Your dad or my dad would say that we'd get an E next to our podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my dad has said a lot of out of pocket stuff, and most of it's hilarious. But there's two things. I was thinking about this as you had asked that question. There's two things. The first one, I think we'll go. I don't know. They're both they're not really lighthearted. I guess I would say they're kind of heavy-ish. The first one I didn't see coming as far as like, this is great advice. The first one is, I remember my dad just telling me as Katie and I started to get really serious and engaged and married even. He said it at our wedding, but he said, I got one piece of advice for you guys. You need to communicate. You need to constantly communicate with each other. You need to constantly make sure you know what's happening. You need to constantly make sure you're in the loop with each other's feelings and how things are making you feel and so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's pretty standard. Like, yeah, we should communicate kind of thing. I don't know what husband and wife doesn't, right, or shouldn't. I kind of just filed that away. And as we got into our marriage, you realize it's a big deal in your own marriage. And there's been little moments where I'm like, man, I should communicate with my wife here. This is something she needs to know, or something she needs to know about how I'm feeling, or vice versa. I need to be okay with her communicating because she's the over communicator. She wants to communicate everything, right? And
sure.
And so I need to be okay with listening to that communication. But I think years later, as I watch other marriages fall apart and I watch a lot of this stuff, I mean, as pastors, we hear a lot of this, like what's happening in marriages, maybe more so than other people. And a lot of times, like some of the common denominators there are they didn't communicate and they just stopped communicating. They stopped caring to listen and hear and speak. So
having done a fair share of marriage counseling over the years, I would agree with that. I think that's good. The communication seems simple, but it's not, right?
Yeah.
And the worst part of communicating is the illusion that it happened.
Yeah.
Like if you think you've communicated, okay, doesn't matter if they haven't heard you. So.
Yeah. Here's the second thing. And this is maybe a little more on the explicit side of things, if you will, but I think it's a good conversation. It's one that we would have from stage, and it's not something we wouldn't say from stage, so I feel comfortable saying it here. And the good news is we have Chris. If we ever need to edit something like this out, you'll never know about it.
Do, sir.
But the other thing I remember him saying was in regard to, and you grow up in a culture, right, in the South where there's some blurry lines between what's faith-based and what's morally based. And the other thing he said was, here's what I need you to know, brother. The minute you open the can of worms that is sexual intimacy, you cannot it is not just a can that you can close right back up. You are a man, and your body is going to now desire different things. And so he told me, he's like, I'm not telling you not to, but I'm telling you when you do, if you do it under the wrong context and the wrong circumstances, you're really going to struggle with this going forward.
Not that this is the podcast for today, but there's, this idea that sex is all about our bodies, right? Like it's our physical needs, or whatever. And I think the reason that you see God place a lot of guardrails around sex and sexuality is not that, it's wanting to keep you from something, quote unquote, but that we are holistic beings, and we cannot separate out our physical from our spiritual or emotional or mental or what have you. And I think that what you find out with people, and I'll say this, at least what I have found out with people who have been very sexually active before marriage, is they almost always have issues sexually after marriage.
Yeah.
And it's because they can't disconnect their sexual experience before marriage and the emotional and mental and, all that goes together. And so I think, when we see the guardrails that God places around that, it is, hey, this isn't just something you do.
Yeah.
It's a part of who you are. That's right. There's a reason Scripture says that you are joined as one flesh, you know, and anyway, maybe that's a podcast for another day.
No, it's good. There's this old adage, and I've heard you use it, and I've used it. It's the devil wants to get you in bed before marriage and out of bed after marriage. That's the goal. What about you, man? What is some out-of-pocket advice that your dad gave you, and you were like, you know what? That actually turned out to be pretty darn good.
Yeah, so on my 18th birthday, Chris, I think you might appreciate this. On my 18th birthday, my dad looks at me and says, son, I want you to know that my legal obligation to you is over, and anything else that I do for you now, I do out of the goodness of my heart. And I'm kind of like, okay, is there some other news coming on the other end of this or whatever?
Yeah.
And for the most part, I think it was, him trying to be funny. But what's funny is he didn't say it like in front of everybody else. He said it to me. But he was being funny. But, I think there is some truth to that in the fact that as a dad, you have a legal obligation to your kids while they're kids. That's to take care of them, to provide for them. That's why we enforce, these, child support payments. Like, no, you got a legal obligation. At 18 years old, that obligation is over. And the relationship that you have with your dad, or the relationship you have with your kids, is going to be based on that mutual goodwill.
Yeah.
And the fact that, no, I'm not around you or connected to you because legally I have to be. I'm around you because I love you and because I want to be around you. And I think we don't talk about that enough. Like the whole focus of parenting in America is parenting your kids. Mm-hmm. But the truth is you're going to be a parent to adults a whole lot longer than you're going to be a parent to kids. And so I think there is something to be maybe said for that on the back end.
Yeah.
Even though the legal obligation is over.
Right. That's such an intriguing thing to me, and I don't want to sit here too long, but like, what would you recommend then to dads? Like, and I know you're still figuring this out because your kids are still in school, but like, what has been your goal, I guess, as a parent, knowing that, okay, one day these won't be my kids that I'm legally responsible for. They will be kids that I have raised that will be my friend and I want a good relationship with, kind of thing.
So a statement that I heard from a, speaker, author named Andy Andrews. He's a believer, but he's not like a Christian speaker. He's like a motivational, Think a redneck Dr. Phil, but not psychologist kind of guy. Like, I'm going to make you feel good with my witty charm and common sense humor. Anyway, he has a statement that really has stuck with me, and maybe the only thing that I heard him say that stuck with me, but when it stuck, it stuck.
Yeah.
He says that the goal of parenting is not to raise great kids. The goal of parenting is to raise kids who become great adults.
It's good.
And I thought that was, it's so simple, but it is true, right? Like, who cares if you have the best middle schooler who made the honor rolls and's the stud pitcher on the team? Right. What's that kid like when he's 30?
Yeah, when there's no more baseball and no more honor rolls.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, that's always stuck with me. I'm not trying to raise the best kids.
Yeah.
I'm trying to raise kids that become great adults.
Yeah, it's good. That's good. So there's some families that, and I know it's a unique perspective, we're talking about Father's Day, we're on the other side of that, but some families don't have the luxury of having a dad in the household. So, I would ask you, what do you think the dad means in the creation order side of things to the household? How important is the father figure to the household?
Well, I think that God has obviously designed the family for the flourishing of mankind.
Unpack that. That's a statement that sounds good at face value, but if we don't understand the intricacies of it, I think we miss a lot of what you're saying.
So, essentially, kids need dads, and kids need moms, and husbands need wives, and wives need husbands, and we all need kids so that we keep moving forward as a species. But the way that God designed the family was not on accident. God designed the family intentionally, and I would say with priority. We talk about the church all the time because we work in the church. We pastor the church. We're part of the church. God made the family long before he made the church. God instituted the family before he instituted the church. And I think that when husbands and wives and children function together under God's blueprint for the family, and we don't have enough time to really dig into what that is, but we'll say husbands, fathers, protect, provide, mothers, care and nurture. I think when we see that function properly, it leads to human flourishing. Yeah. And that means that not that everybody's going to be great and have a great life and no issues if those things are in place, but I think they give you the best shot at reaching your potential and a place that you want to be in life. And I think, for instance, when you look at those who struggle in school and those who run in trouble with the law, or those who are not able to have the paying job that they wish they had, the good, steady paying job they wish they had, or whatever, I'm not saying that you have to have a mom and dad to do those things. There are people who've been raised by amazing single mothers or single fathers who have just, set the world on fire with their awesomeness. What I'm saying is, statistically speaking, there is a disproportionate amount of one-parent homes for people who, let's just say, aren't where they wanted to be in life.
Yeah.
And I'm not laying that blame on anybody. I'm just saying that statistics show us that God designed a family for humans to flourish, and we do our best flourishing when we are in God's design for the family. And in my understanding, the father is the head of that family spiritually, who is able to lead his family because his family trusts in him and his deference to put their needs above his own.
Yeah, that's good. I think the creation order side of it speaks to that, and that's fascinating to me, right? Like, if you just get God's basic design right, things are going to go better. If you nail his not just basic design, but you really step into the biblical worldview, things get even better than better, right? And I think one of the statistics that we've seen float around is, in particular with the dads, I think it's when the dad comes to faith, there's a 93% chance the rest of the family comes to faith, right? And
I've seen that statistic.
Yeah, and so it's like, man, you guys, you want to know what's better for the world to flourish, it's that they're in relationship with Jesus, and that starts with your family unit being in relationship with Jesus. And so, I think there's a ton of practical benefits to that, and I think there's also some spiritual benefits to that. And this is not to beat up families that are they currently don't have a dad, but this is to say, if you are the dad in the household, man, what you do matters, and you pull a lot of weight.
It matters.
Yeah,
that's right. And I think that's such a good point. We're not dragging families that don't have this structure.
Right.
There are some great families I know of that don't have the structure, whether it be the dad and stepmom and mom and stepdad, or a single parent, or whatever. There are families that figure out ways to make it work. What we're saying is that when the family operates the way God intended, things tend to go better.
Yeah.
We live in a world that is broken by sin and a world that is full of sinful men and women. So that not always is the case. But when it is, then things tend to have a better chance to work out right.
Yep. And you got to pull your weight where you pull it if it's a situation you're in. I had a friend of mine from high school, actually, and she posted this on her Instagram story, and it was her with the kids at the river down there where she lives, and she said, "Happy Father's Day to me," and she had the clown emoji after it. Just like, this guy's not involved. I'm pulling the weight. It is what it is. I'm the dad in this situation, and I'm doing the best I can with it, playing the dad and the mom. And it's just not easy. It's hard sometimes, but
it's crazy hard.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I can't imagine. So good for you ladies who are doing it. Good for you single dads who are doing it. Chipping away at it. We would love to help you any way we can, but I think it's not easy, but it's a good thing.
This is maybe the good segue into what we're going to talk about today from the Message Sunday. Is I think this is why we see the importance of the body of Christ, and the family of faith, not just the natural family, because I think that the church uniquely provides ways for other believers to come alongside families that are not in the ideal situation to offer additional support, guidance, help, whatever, to provide men who can help fill that father figure role, to provide women who can help nurture and care for kids, not because no one else can. There are other people out there that can. I think of coaches as, substitute father figures, right? But the church is uniquely positioned to do that in a special way, but it only happens when there is that mutual accountability and connectedness.
Man, that's such a good point. And I think, you look at the church and you look at the language in Scripture and you see the redemptive qualities of the church. And I think the whole point of the gospel is that God redeems this broken mess, right? And then the whole point of the church, to the quote that we use Sunday, is that we would model God's redemption to the world. And if it's a broken situation, we should be the ones, whether it's poverty or whether it's a household, to step up and start to play some of that redemptive role in the equation as we lean into some of that. And so, when I say we want to help you any way we can, I'm not just throwing that out there flippantly. I mean, no, we, the local church, want to help you any way we can, because we believe it's and we've had this conversation before, it's our obligation, our duty to step up and be the front lines for redemption in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, maybe this is taking the rabbit trail a little bit too far, but I do think it's important. We look in Scripture at some very explicit commands for believers to look out for widows and orphans. Mm-hmm. And we take that, I think, for granted in modern society because there's so many social safety nets available to people like that. And even in our part of the world here in rural North Central Florida, most people have family around them that can kind of help step in and fill some of those gaps. But when you look back at when the church started in, the Middle East and Rome, in that early, turn of the century or turn of the calendar, time, there were not social networks. There were not social systems. There were not people in place to come along and help. And so from its inception, the church really did help fill those gaps. And just because those gaps aren't as glaring in our society today does not mean it's still the church's role to help fill some of them.
Yeah, it reminds me of that Casting Crowns song, If We Are the Body, right? And
wow, what song am I unfamiliar?
Here we go, baby. If we are the body, right? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, that one, I got it.
Why aren't you? Okay, I'm not going to do that again. I got roasted last time I sang on this podcast, and that's why it's been like 2 months. So anyway, Casting Crowns is a song. It's basically the premise is if we are the body, then why aren't his hands reaching? Why aren't his feet going? And I think, it's like, man, if we are the body, if we're supposed to be the redemptive plan for a lot of these things, then why aren't we going? And I do think it's a phenomenal segue into Paul's conversation, because his whole conversation that we had this week was centered around this analogy that he used. And he used this analogy and he says, hey, here's the deal. I want you to think of your gifts and I want you to think of what you do in the church as a piece of a body. And as you understand the body, what you understand is that a body can only function at max capacity when all of its members are healthy and involved. And so I love this. I said this Sunday. I was like, he puts it in layman's terms for us. And then he uses this example, this analogy of the body. And in the background of that, one of the things that we were reading through in our commentaries this past week was that he probably had the Asclepian rituals in mind, right? And there was a God, and this may be a good spot for our nerd out section, actually, as we get going.
Well, I'm going to let you take this week's nerd out section because I put this additional note in our notes because I thought it was interesting, but I wasn't preaching this week. I was at kids camp. And so you are the one who did the deep dive here.
Yeah.
So nerd out for us.
So there's a lot here because I did like a whole crash course because I had never heard of mostly any of this. And so when I saw it, I was like, man, this is wildly intriguing. And so I got on the internet like any good studier does and said, all right, what's the internet have to offer with this? And so I got into this rabbit hole of like all these different body parts that were found at excavation sites. And what it leads us to know about the culture, especially in Corinth, is that there's a god, Asclepius. And what they would do is they would take these body parts that they made basically out of clay, terracotta, right? And so they would go and they would form a leg if they had an ailment for their leg, or if they had an issue with their arm, they would make an arm. If they had an issue with their eyeball, they'd make an eyeball. All the way, and it got really intricate. Like as I'm reading through this, it occurs to me like they're not ignorant to where a lot of these problems are. There's lower intestines carved into stones and clay. There's smaller or upper intestines, like smaller, whatever. Like
actually, they were some of the like earliest gut health people.
Yeah, man, it was crazy to get into the rabbit trail a lot. But basically, what they would do is they would say, okay, here's my issue. I lost a finger, or I have an issue in my foot, and they would make a foot and they would take it to the temple. And they would go through sometimes like a 24-hour period of meditation, and they had a couple of hopes in mind. One is that they would receive healing by the end of the meditation from this God. Two is that they would get some divine revelation as to what they need to do to get healing. And so
either, hey, miraculously healed, or miraculously go do this.
Yeah, yeah, like some kind of like, oh, here's the medicine you need. Go find this plant, or go find this person, that kind of thing. And they would go through this with this in this temple, and they would bring it to them. And so in the backdrop of everything that Paul is saying, he probably has this whole thing in mind where there's a temple that all the people at Corinth are very familiar with, and there's just body parts scattered everywhere because they've been bringing them to the god Asclepius and asking her to heal them. And so he's using this analogy, and I think it's good for us because we understand the body, and honestly, you don't need any of this context to really understand what he's trying to convey. But I think for the church at Corinth, it maybe has a little bit more of a punch because they're looking around, and Paul's like, hey, do you want to be like this place that just has a bunch of body parts and none of them are useful because they're all separate from the actual body and they're just all kind of thrown about and like that. It's fascinating because I was doing some picture digging, like, it was everything you could possibly imagine involved with the human body as they're doing these excavations. And just a really neat thing to know as you're reading through this, like he's got a purpose with his analogy in mind, and he's painting the picture for them, and he's saying we are useless if we look like this, if we're not coming together. And so
that's good.
Just a fun little part of that.
Like, it doesn't do us any good to be all these like random body parts.
Yeah.
We got to be a body.
Yeah, you can't be on an island with the gifts, specifically in this conversation, that Paul has given you. You've got giftings, and you need to use them together. And so, I don't know, for me, it was super helpful. It made the picture maybe a little bit more clear as to why he was passionate, but I would love to hear from you on this. You have this analogy, and really, I guess we can kind of dig into it a little bit more, but he's basically saying if you're a toe and your job is to be the best toe you can possibly be, and you decide to go off and do your own thing as a toe, the body's not going to have the balance it needs. It's not going to function properly. And so my question for you would be, where do you see this happening really well in the American church right now?
Where do I see it happening well? Man, that's a tough question because I'm not sure how well it happens in the American church. I think if I were to say it's happening well in one particular area, it would probably revolve around missions and church planting.
Okay.
Because I think there are some people that are uniquely gifted as missionaries, not just share the gospel with people they work with, their family or whatever, but like uniquely called to the mission field.
Global missions.
Yeah, even national, but just like, intentional new work missions, right? Or work on a new field missions. And I think the church has done a good job of supporting those people to say like, hey, you don't have to do this by yourself. Let us come alongside you to support you to do this. I'm thinking about his cherished ones that are a couple that attend our Live Oak location when they're stateside. They're not stateside often because they have a orphanage in Kenya that works to reunite orphans with family.
So cool.
We're like, hey, that's what God's gifted you to, called you to. How can we help support that? Right. So I think that's a good example. I think church planting is another good example. AJ, you and I have had this conversation. The Orchard is a church plant. Pastor Eddie planted the Orchard here in Lake City after pastoring 100-plus-year-old churches for years. And it was an incredible thing because not often do you have people who pastor established churches well and plant churches well. Mm-hmm. And you and I have talked, I think I would be a terrible church planter. I just don't think that I would do a good job at like starting a church up from scratch. But because there are people who are gifted in that way, you see the church as a whole come alongside to say, okay, how do we support these people to plant churches as God has called them to plant? So I think that jumps to the forefront of my mind when I'm thinking, where do I see that? Hey, these people are gifted and and the church is doing that well to support them in a interdependent way, let's say. Not independent, not dependent totally, but interdependent way.
Yeah, that's good. So I would follow that up and I would say, where do you see it going not so well in the American church? Where do you see this division? Where do you see siloed parts of the body not engaging with other parts of the body who have become siloed, that kind of thing?
Well, I would go twofold where I see it not going well. The first part would be in divisions and silos.
Okay.
It's no secret, we've talked about this, that the American church is really divided, in this series where we're talking about the role of the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit in the church. Man, that's a fault line, right? Like how you view the Spirit and the Spirit's role in the church is a very divisive issue. And so I think when we look at it that way, maybe we are divided along denominational lines because of doctrines, but maybe in a more perfect world, those wouldn't be denominational divides. They would just be a divide of gifting and emphasis inside of the same church. So maybe we have separated out some of those body parts like in that temple instead of letting it just be one body. And then related to that, in churches that do share the same doctrine, I see silos, right? Like, hey, you've got the student ministry over here, but they're not really a part of the church. They're just an add-on to the church. Or you've got the women's ministry. It's not really the church. It's an add-on to the church. And I think that's something that we're aware of at the Orchard because we want to keep our locations from becoming that, right? Yeah. We don't want to have, three arms that are separated, from each other, but we want to be connected together in an interdependent way so that we can be one body. And so I do see siloed ministries off where not even churches are competing against churches, but ministries inside the same church are competing against each other. Staff members are competing against each other. It's just like Corinthians chapter 1 and 2. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Paul, and that whole kind of thing. So I think that's the first way I see this not going well in the American church. The second way I see this not going well in the American church is, I think what you said in your message Sunday. It's that it feels like we have 80% of the people sitting back willing to let 20% of the people do the work. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing is we're reinforcing the idea that those 20% of the people are the only people who can do ministry, who should do ministry, and we're wearing them out. And then we have 80% of the people who are like, well, I'm just coming to hear a message and to sing on Sundays. And so there's some inherent dysfunction in that. It's kind of like the pictures you see floating around the internet all the time of the guys who never do leg day. You know what I mean? They always skip leg day. You got like this one part of your body that's like massively overworked, and then you're standing on top of toothpicks. Yeah. And I wonder if that's not how the American church is in some ways. Like we have so many gifted, called, empowered Christians who are not living in their gifting and calling, and so they're atrophying, right? Mm-hmm. Now, my caveat here would be we can not only think about this inside of the boundaries of what happens on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night church program.
Sure.
When we're talking about the church being the church, we're talking about 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And so because of that, I'm not saying that we only have 20% of the people that volunteer at the church. Maybe that's the case. But what if we have another 20% that work outside of the church? And yeah, they don't change diapers in the nursery, and they're not a greeter, but they are actively involved in their child's school, where they are living out the message of the gospel in that school. Yeah, okay, great. That counts toward you being a part of the body and acting.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I'm talking about are people who are not in any way, shape, or form inside of the church or outside of the church walking in their gifting or calling, and the only thing about their life that is Christian is an hour a couple of times a month where they come to church. That's where the issue is.
Absolutely. I have two thoughts on that. One, this makes me think of something that I've always kind of just had looming in the back of my head. But you have, when you hear Paul write, he says to the church at Corinth, to the church at Philippi, to the church at Ephesus, right? And it's all these different churches who are known as Christians in this community.
Yeah.
And we don't have that. We have all these different churches who have Christians who are known in different ways in their community.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. Like, the first thing is not, that person's a Christian and a part of that church. They're like, they're this person, and they just go to that church.
Right.
That's good.
And it's like, for me, what would it look like if we were so united that we were the church in Lake City, and the Parkviews, and the Hopefuls, and the Orchards, and in the other denominations? We were like, that's the picture I get in my head of the issues they're having, is like, hey, those are just charismatic brothers in a different branch of the same church, but we've like divided the division, and we're all the way down to where it's...
Yeah, I think this is where the conversation from last week becomes important. We believe what we believe because we believe it's right.
Right.
And we divide as churches and denominations along those lines, sometimes not because we couldn't be together as one church, but because our preference is to not be together as one church so that we can more fully lean into this niche of belief.
Right.
And that's fine. You know, I think that one thing I've said is that if there's not something unique about the ministry of your local church, then we're just, duplicating efforts with the people down the road.
Right.
So I don't think it's wrong to have multiple churches, multiple denominations. I think the issue is when they unnecessarily divide us from the body. Like Paul's saying, hey, we're after unity, not uniformity.
Right.
We don't need everybody to be hands and nobody to be feet. We don't need everybody to be eyeballs and nobody to be mouths, So that's fine, but let's make sure that there's a body that holds us together, and we're not just out there as with an amputated arm on our own.
Right. Yeah. And I just get this picture that like Paul is writing to what we would have as two different denominations now, but they're under the same roof.
I think that's a great point. I think
it's like, man,
in modern world, these would be two different denominations, 100%.
Yeah. The second thought I had was just this little snippet that Paul has in there in this passage as we're reading through it, and it's that you are here on purpose. Like there's not an accident. God knows exactly where you are, and He's got you there as a part of the body. And so I think when you come back to that conversation about the 80-20, all that kind of stuff, it's like, man, what if you believe that? What if you believe that God strategically has you here and that you have a purpose? Would you start to lean into it? Would you start to try to figure out what that looks like? Or like, how would it change you?
So I think what would help with that is if we quit thinking about our Sunday morning worship services and the organizations that put them on as the ultimate expression of the church.
Sure.
Now, don't mishear me. I'm not knocking the institutional church. The institutional church, the organizational church is necessary, I believe. I mean, it just is. But what I think would help us really embrace that you are where you are on purpose with purpose is if we understood that we don't have 37 different bodies in Lake City.
Yeah.
We have a body in Lake City.
Body, right.
It is not...
In Live Oak and Brantford.
Yeah. It is not the Orchard that defines the church. It is not the Christ Central that divides the church. It is not the First Presbyterian that defines the church. It is Jesus that defines the church. That is the defining, this is what it means to be in the church, is Jesus and knowing Him.
That's right.
And, that relationship with Him. And so I think when we understand that, it helps us to kind of back up and say, well, just because I'm not doing X, Y, and Z in my church's programs does not alleviate my responsibility to live on mission where I am, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have to invite somebody to my church to share the gospel with them. Matter of fact, I think if we want to just change one thing really quick in the American church, let's change the fact that sharing the gospel is not the same as inviting somebody to church. Both are super important.
Right.
Great for you to do both, not the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Not the same.
You can share the gospel and they go to a different church, win.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and because we have kind of dumbed down sharing the gospel to just inviting somebody to church, well, who are the people who are easiest to invite to church? Well, people who you know already like church.
Mm-hmm.
You're not really happy with your church right now? You'll be happy at my church if you like church. Okay, I'm not saying don't invite people to church. I'm saying let's share the gospel. Let's talk about Jesus. Let's let the church side of that little C sort itself out. Let's get them into the big C part of it first.
Yeah.
And I think when you kind of don't see your local church as what defines the church, but you see Jesus as what defines the church, it maybe helps us zoom out enough to make that a little bit more plausible.
Which, low-key, is Paul's entire point in this section, because he starts with...
What if it was?
Yeah. Like, what if... Yeah, he starts with, you are the body that belongs to Christ. And it's, man, this is your unity, not your preference, not your theological position or disposition. It is the fact that you belong to Jesus. But I want to give you a second as our lead pastor to speak into this, and take your time if you need to, chew on it. But where do you see our church doing this well? Where do you see our church being the body well?
Well, I don't think I have to chew on that very long, because I think that we do a good job of recognizing where some of our people are more gifted and leaning into them when it comes to that area, right? And I like that, because I think we understand that, and I'll just speak from a staff position of our church, right? Because one of my primary roles is to pastor and shepherd our staff well.
Right.
And when I look at our staff, we have an org chart.
Mm-hmm.
There's a hierarchy of who's boss of who and so on. But I don't feel like that's a thing a whole lot, because I think we say, oh man, you're gifted, you're passionate. Yeah, what do you think about this? How should we do this?
Yeah.
And so I think that mutual submission
it's good.
is very important in that. And I think we at the church mutually submit to one another very well. And I would be wrong if I didn't say that I think that comes straight from the modeling of Pastor Eddie since he found this.
Yeah.
Like, no more of an open-handed leader in the history of churches anywhere than Eddie Blaylock, who was like, yeah, I may be the boss, but I'm more than willing to submit to you in this area because I see that you maybe have a clearer calling and a clearer gifting in this than I do. And so one way we do this well at the church is, I think we are very, very mutually submissive. We're not, there's not a big dog syndrome around here.
I would affirm that completely, which is such a great example of the body functioning like the body. Like, let's let this part speak into this and lean into this. So again, as our lead pastor, and take a second if you need to, where do you see us not doing this well as a church? Where would you love to see us improve on doing a better job of all the members of the body working together?
There's a couple different places I could go with this. And it's not because I think we have a terrible church and there's a lot we need to do better at.
Sure. It's
just because that's how I'm wired. I'm wired to see where can we do better? What can we do different? And I think for me, at the top of that list, 1A would be, I want people to break out of the mindset that to serve the church, to minister means you got to do something inside our four walls.
Yeah.
As non-traditional as the Orchard is, that's one area where I feel like we're still super traditional.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to see some breakouts from that. I think of the Care Portal that was started by number one fan of the podcast, Josh Williams.
Shout out to Josh.
Did not start Care Portal, but was the first Orchard person to really engage with Care Portal and start the ministry for our Live Oak location through Care Portal. Yeah. And that flowing over to Sandy here in the Lake City location, now doing that. That's nothing that is a program of the Orchard. That's just how people of the Orchard can serve the community and serve Jesus.
Such a
perfect. Love it.
Yeah.
Because I think if we want to continue to build the organization of the church, then we need you to serve on Sunday morning and Wednesday. Right. And don't get me wrong, we need to do that.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about in the future needing to do that, because we're at the place where we need to create more space and more seats for new people to come and experience Jesus at the Orchard.
That's right.
Our seats are getting full. Our ministries are getting full. We need more people to step up to the plate to volunteer and serve in a church capacity so that we can keep reaching more people. So I'm not poo-pooing the idea of ministering, serving in the organizational church. That's 100% going to be a need. But I want to see people begin to spread their wings in the community to reach, to grow our reach, to grow our impact and influence in the community. I want to see men and women say, Chip, I feel called to this section of the community, so this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
How can the church help me with this? Not, God laid this on my heart. What are you guys going to do with it?
Right.
God laid this on my heart. I'm running with it. Now we as a local church who have, all right, now's where it comes into play, an organizational structure can leverage that structure to help you and your calling in the community.
We are a resource that helps equip the saint for the ministry that they're called to or passionate about.
Another podcast, write in if you want us to talk about this more one day. We have got to start seeing the local church more as a missions organization than a chapel.
Yeah, that's
more as a missions organization than a conference.
Yeah,
and that's how we have to start organizing ourselves.
Yeah, and you talk about this, and I think it's a great segue. The last thing I really want to talk about on here this morning, today, whenever you listen to this, but you have this idea that we want people to be passionate about those things, and you didn't preach this week, but you did. Put our notes together in a lot of ways. And when I say put our notes together, you put a lot of really good thoughts in there and gave us some clear direction as far as, where Paul's going and what we would talk about. And the last thing that you put in there I thought was so good, and I really wanted to spend time leaning into and not just blowing past, is the idea that this doesn't just happen. You don't just get fired up about something that you weren't fired up about until someone told you it was a problem. This is something that becomes a burden for you when you are, and you use the fruit in this conversation, and I see this, when you are walking by the Spirit, Galatians 5, right? And so when you walk by the Spirit, you engage with the fruit of the Spirit, it grows in you, and so I would say, if you want to, take a second and talk about why the fruit side of this conversation is probably the most important side of the conversation, more so even than the spiritual gifts that you get.
Well, I don't want to talk about that too much, because I really think we're going to hit this hard this coming
week. Okay.
And that's because you look at what Paul says, and he says, hey, desire the greater gifts. What's the greater gift? Love.
Yeah.
Fruit of the Spirit? Love.
It's good.
So I think the point here, and we've said this, talking about spiritual gifts, is that we have so misunderstood spiritual gifts to be superpowers or attributes of believers. It's, this ability that you get that's on command whenever you get saved. And we have not seen them rightly as the working of the Spirit through us. And so I think finding a way to connect spiritual gifts to spiritual fruit is really important for the church.
Yeah.
Because the fruit is the point, the gifts are the means.
Yeah.
The gifts aren't the point. It's not the point for you to be a super-powered Christian with this amazing ability that's a magic trick. You know what I mean? The point is that you would look like Jesus. The point is that the church would be formed together.
Yeah.
The point is that as the church is formed together, the community would see that and come to trust Christ as their Savior. And that comes through spiritual fruit. Fruit is the point. Gifts are the means that fruit is cultivated. And so, I haven't thought about this a ton yet, because I'm still putting our notes together for our sermon meeting tomorrow. When this airs, we'll be working on the next week's sermon. But to me, and maybe, who knows, maybe you'll hear this Sunday, or maybe this is just what you get for listening to the podcast. In a lot of ways, spiritual gifts are the fertilizer that we throw on the spiritual fruit to help them really grow. Right?
I like that.
And I think that's kind of the perspective that we need to take on this. Is this the point is always the fruit, not the wow, they're so gifted and such a great leader, such a great speaker. Every time that person prays for me, that's not the point. The point is the looking like Jesus.
Man, I guess it should have occurred to me that 13 comes after 12, and that this is where we would be next, but I guess it hadn't yet. And you're preaching this coming week in Lake City, and I think this one's going to be right in your wheelhouse as far as I can already hear the tongue-in-cheek comments. I can already hear the emphasis.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's going to be good, man. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Is sarcasm a spiritual gift?
I don't know. We have to.
God's grace to
we said the list wasn't exhausted.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
Man, that's good. Anything else you would round out with, not stepping on next week's toes, any concluding thoughts that you would say, hey, really put the emphasis here for your own? I would say this. I would ask you like this. anything for the individual who's asking, all right, I hear you. I want to grow in my fruit. I want to grow and I want to experience some of this fertilizer. I want to lean into this side of the Spirit that maybe I had never leaned into. What would be your advice for them to get jump started on that?
We are the church. None of us can be the church on our own. That's where we landed last week. Yep. That was kind of, when I was putting the message together, that was the takeaway I wanted us to hit. We are the church. None of us can be the church on our own. You are not going to grow in your gifts or in your fruit if you're isolated. And just showing up on Sunday morning does not count as being connected. Shooting you straight. Yeah. It doesn't. There are so many commands for us to one another inside the local church, love one another, care for one another, encourage one another, challenge one another, correct one another. There's so much of that one another that cannot happen outside of a relationship with other believers. And so if you want to grow in your fruit and in your gifts, well, then I would suggest that you start to build some intentional relationship with other believers. And maybe the easiest place to do that is you need to find a small group. Small groups are going to be hit hard when school starts back. We're going to make a big small groups push. The new semester is going to kick in. Find a small group, get plugged in. It is not the Bible study part of the small group that engages your spiritual growth muscles. It is the doing it in community that engages your spiritual growth muscles. And, at the point of kind of drawing that line between organizational church and institutional church and just the body, let me just say, if you're not in a small group and you don't want to be in a small group, that still doesn't alleviate you from doing this in community. And so find a couple of intentional relationship with other Christians. We call those D groups at the Orchard.
We have a name for this.
But find some just people that you get with, because you're not going to grow as you should in your fruit or your gifts without other people.
Yeah. So good. I love it. It's a good word. And let us help you figure that out. If you're at Brantford, man, let's get with Pastor Eddie. If you're in Live Oak, let's get with Pastor Matt. If you're in Lake City, get with me and we'll figure that out and we'll get you plugged in. We want to help facilitate this. This is us being the resource that helps you be the Christian that lives on mission. And so we want to have a vehicle for all these different things, and we want to help you get plugged into them as best we possibly can. So reach out. Let's make it happen. And I am looking forward to next week.
Yeah, it's going to be good. We'll see you then.
See ya. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow in this journey of faith and embrace community. If you have more questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website and stay connected. Your questions are what make this podcast a dynamic and enriching experience. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who may find value in these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you and will help you bring Sunday's message into your week ahead. Keep the conversation alive, and remember, we're all on this journey together.